Hey guys, welcome back to another video. In the first couple, we talked about the organization and mission sets of Special Operations Forces in the Halo universe. In today's, we're going to talk about the training pipeline. How does one become a Spartan 2? How effective is it, and how does it compare? Starting with the Halo universe, Spartan 2s, as we know, were kidnapped at a very young age, as young as 5 or 6. They were trained and indoctrinated from that early point in military and tactics. They were given academic training to make them intellectuals, physically augmented in a process so grueling many of them are killed or permanently disfigured. They weren't even able to complete their training. If you look at the Fall of Reach, Halsey says she wanted to give them a few more years, but due to the onset of the Human Covenant War, they were forced to go into an operational taskings to go out and fight to stave off what appeared as an inevitable defeat of humanity. Spartan 3s were similar, except they were pulled from orphans whose parents had been killed. They had different augmentations than Spartan 2s, to allow them to be produced quicker. The downside was, as much as the UNSC wanted to create and expand core of Spartans, because the Covenant posed such a threat, the Spartan 3s they were able to produce, they quickly lost in very high casualty taskings, and that was just to ensure their existence for a longer period of time. We know ODSTs are recruited and trained from amongst common Marine line troops. They go through specialty training, and then from there, they become ODSTs. And Spartan 4s are very similar. They are taking from that pool of existing Special Operations Forces, whether it's ODSTs or otherwise, and augmented and trained to become the best of the best. Taking what was a very lengthy process in Spartan 2s and shrinking it down to something that can be accomplished with adults. So how does it compare to the real world? Some of the two biggest groups that we see, like Navy SEALs, you can be recruited off the street or from within the Navy itself. You get some prep experience. Almost all the selection courses do this. They'll have prep courses to help develop you. And then after a couple weeks orientation, you go through 2 months of conditioning, which is incredibly grueling and physically punishing, including the infamous Hell Week. A process so difficult, luck, just like it does with Master Chief, really comes into play here. I have known several individuals who got all the way through, and then something as small as slipping and falling and breaking a leg, or going through heat stroke, or having a congenital heart issue they were not aware of, precludes them from being able to complete. Some of that are things that you would never know about until you push yourself to the limit. And that's where kind of luck comes into play. Sometimes, despite all your best training, being lucky is the reason you made it and your friend didn't. Once you're able to get through that conditioning phase, you have several months of small unit tactics, diving training, because it is a Navy, as well as the SEAL qualification training to round it all out. It is similar and different in some sense for Green Berets. You go through Special Forces assessment selection, a little over 3 weeks of almost pure hazing, but they also do things like IQ tests and mental personality assessments. You can actually go through SFAS and complete it and not get picked up to be a Green Beret strictly based off things that they have seen. Once that's done, you do several months of job training, small unit tactics, and a lot of cultural skills training as well. And you follow it up with another 3 months of language training. And like I said, because Special Forces is heavily influenced by that cultural and language ability to embed yourself with partner forces and develop them. ODST comparable stuff like Ranger Regiment and Marine Raiders, you go through a selection process from amongst the common military force. Like if you wanted to be a platoon leader in the Ranger Regiment, you would need to first be a platoon leader in the conventional army. The goal there, just as is with ODSTs, you're able to take experiences from across the entire military, refine it through the selection and training pipeline, and then enhance that regiment to be even better. So where does the Halo universe and the real world kind of overlap and mesh? Well, taking a look at, just being strictly honest here, this might be a spicy hot take, but the Spartan 2 training pipeline isn't worth the squeeze at all. And I feel like the narrative driven by 343 is starting to acknowledge that. Spartan 2s, taken from a young age, don't have the opportunity to build very secure attachments to their parents. Keep in mind, your brain doesn't finish developing until you're many years into being an adult. So you take someone as young as 5 or 6, you take them away from that family environment. Yes, I know the Spartans have each other, and yes, I know they were pulled from the most capable, but you're still going to have potential social and behavioral problems, stuff like avoidant personality disorders, because they didn't have very secure attachments to their families. They were plucked away and put into a very stressful and traumatizing environment, which is how training is at a young age. The fact that they were pulled so early, I understand that in the UNSC lore, they did a lot of screening for genetics and stuff, but that early before puberty means that medical issues could show up and DQ them later on without them being aware. I've had and have known people who've gone through and been training for some of these special application processes, and something pops up down the road, or in worst case, kills them. And it's like you would never know until you push yourself to that limit. And those are things that you can't really screen for as a child, because they very well may not show up until you're developing as an adult when you're 13 or 14 years old, which at that point, Spartan 2s were already being sent into combat, having been augmented. All the training makes them excellent individuals, excellent, single man machines, but they lack cohesiveness beyond the Spartan teams. In the lore they talk about, they're like, hey, Spartan 2s get along well. They have like kind of secret communication stuff, like specific songs and isms and the way they talk to each other, and that's great, but they do not mesh well beyond that. They have a lot of issues with ODSTs. We see that in the Fall of Reach. We know in Halo 4, when Oni is questioning Dr. Halsey, they mention that Master Chief, like, yo, he's weird. And he's very antisocial and very shut in. And that kind of still plays out into Halo Infinite, where we see that he's like very gung-ho. And the pilot, who's supposed to be like your everyday Joe, is like, yo, you're a machine that may not die, but I will. And that terrifies me. And the Chief really, I feel like, doesn't do a good job of managing that kind of anxiety, because he doesn't know it. He's been raised from such a young age just to be a machine. Spartan 3s are like that as well, but exacerbated with the trauma issues. It's like, oh, now you're taking orphans. It's any shock you get Spartan 3s like a meal with skulls carved into their visors. And the worst thing you want to have happen is a Spartan goes rogue, and now it's like Apocalypse Now. They're out in the jungle, getting worshipped up as a god, and you have to send somebody after them and take them out. All that said, Spartan 4s are different. They're treated like modern day soft. They're recruited from within. It kind of amuses me, and I find it uncharacteristic that 343 shows Spartan 4s like in Spartan Operations to be very kind of like cocky, where in the real world, yes, you have some egos, but realistically, people put that aside when it's mission time. They're incredibly task oriented. You would not see some of the lackadaisical attitudes, in my opinion, in modern day special operations, like how 343 treats Spartan 4s. ODSTs, though, are also strikingly similar to modern day Rangers and Marine Raiders, in the sense that the way they're trained, assessed, and joined, as well as the esprit de corps and the heritage ODSTs have, is very comparable and very realistic. All that said, I find that the training pipeline to develop Spartans in particular compared to ODSTs is the most divergent from reality into fiction. The fact that Spartan 2s are plucked away as kids and trained makes for good drama, but it's incredibly psychologically damaging, and we understand that in the real world, and that is something that's heavily emphasized in modern special operations, because when you have people deployed constantly, fighting over and over and over, it's very mentally tasking. You leave a part of you doing stuff like that behind, to the point where modern special operations, SOCOM has invested a lot of money in mental resiliency, having people available to help you kind of understand what you went through and to keep you the same on the backside. Something that we don't see from the UNSC ever. And that's why I talk about taking them from a young age, when they don't have secure attachments, creates a very high likelihood that they kind of acknowledge in Halo 4 and beyond that they're insecure, in a sense that they do not have attachments. They're very isolated and individualistic, which is fine. But consider this, when the wars end, the created are gone, Cortana's defeated, the banished are gone, what happens with Master Chief? And it's sad, because the vibe I get from the UNSC is the intent is to simply throw Spartans away when it is all said and done, which is incredibly unfair for the sacrifices they've made. I mean, do we really expect that Master Chief is going to go back to Reach? Hopefully it's not looking too glassy these days, and he's going to get a log cabin and go fishing after everything he's been through and all the losses he's suffered. It is one thing that games diverge incredibly from real life, is in the real world, they do invest a lot of both time and money to try and manage those aspects of warfighting that the UNSC appears to hand wave, in particular for Spartan 2s and 3s. You want your special operations forces to be mentally resilient in the sense that they can process and go through very demanding and punishing things and come out on the other side still able to be the same person, to be agile, and to be leaders, to inspire the people around them. You don't want to put yourself in a situation like the UNSC does with Master Chief, where he goes through something incredibly traumatic through all the original trilogy as well as Halo 4, losing Cortana, and they acknowledge it in Halo 5 when Fred makes a comment about Master Chief is just doing mission after mission after mission to escape the fact that he is suffering and has gone through trauma without helping. Because in that case, you're doing a disservice to the Chief, you're failing him, and like I said, what happens when it's all over? and he's been through so much. Will he still be the same person? Will he be able to cope in a world where there is no mission or armor for him to wear? If you enjoyed this series on special operations, feel free to like and subscribe. It means a lot to me as a small channel. The next series I plan on doing is going to focus on space warfare, ships, as well as combat, and what it may look like, seeing as how we don't fight in space in the current day. Everybody take care and have a great week.